Haven't you heard the rumor?
That again?
They say all the men who died were cheaters, so they were cursed.
Just get your ass back to work.
Atlus is one of the most unique and talented developers out there, creating some of the most entertaining and endearing titles to come out in the last few decades, each one with its own distinct sense of style and flair. The Shin Megami Tensei series alone is full of so many great games that span across several different universes and genres. Only a developer like this would be able to pull off a concept like Catherine, the story of the sordid love life of a 30-something-year-old caught between having a relationship with two women, both strangely named Catherine, which plays out through multiple choice text messages and block-pushing puzzle towers. It's such a simple concept for a game, but they managed to contextualize it to such a degree that it has a much larger appeal than if it was just a simple game about hopping up blocks and getting a high score. Normally, Atlus's games that have these slice-of-life relationship elements are RPGs, which thematically tie the leveling up mechanics with growing your bonds with characters. This makes Catherine really original, because I can't think of another game that would tie this kind of gameplay with this kind of narrative, and while it is pretty jarring conceptually, they managed to pull it off really well by making this a world where this ridiculousness is possible instead of trying to brush it under the rug. But let's start from the beginning so I can try to make sense of this weird little game for you. The main character of the game is a man named Vincent, whose relationship with a woman named Catherine is on the rocks. That's Catherine with a K, by the way. As he goes about his life hanging out with his friends at their local bar, the Sleepy Sheep, he eventually meets a woman named Catherine. That's Catherine with a C, who he ends up being seduced by. This begins a moral dilemma where Vincent has to decide what he wants out of a relationship and who he wants to be with. Every night thereafter, he begins waking up not in his bed, but in a horrific realm where a towering series of blocks looms over him. The world is filled with others who've been summoned there as well, all appearing as sheep to one another. With no other choice, they all begin climbing the tower, and those who aren't able to make it to the next floor of the tower by the end of the night are lost to the collapsing floor beneath them and are found dead in the real world the next day. Vincent struggles with his relationships during the day morally, then struggles for his life physically at night. The only moments of relief are the short moments of ease you feel at the bar, conversing with the odd people who inhabit the game's world. Throughout the game, you'll be judged by the way you respond to text messages you receive throughout the night, as well as the answers you give when you're put in the hot seat before moving to the next level of the tower. This affects how certain events in the game play out and determines which of the game's multiple endings you get at the end of the game. While you may think there are only 2 endings, one for each of the girls, there are a total of 8 endings, and they're actually very different in the typical Atlus fashion. But that's all dependent on whether or not you can actually survive the trials you have to face every night. Pushing blocks may look easy, but figuring out how to carve yourself a path up the tower isn't a walk in the park. There are all kinds of very specific rules you have to follow, and the levels will change themes, creating even more rules you have to contend with. The main idea is that you can push blocks as long as your feet are on the ground, and they'll be suspended over empty space as long as one of their corners is touching the edge of another block. You can hang and climb all around blocks to navigate around and find a way to pull yourself up, but you can't just climb up a series of blocks Uncharted style. You'll have to contend with all kinds of special blocks too, from heavy blocks you can't push to brittle ones that break after you step on them enough. Spikes and slippery ice blocks are also hazards that'll try to kill you, as well as the floor beneath you slowly crumbling away over time. Sometimes even other sheep will be climbing alongside you, trying to sabotage you or getting themselves killed by accident. For a game about climbing blocks, you're juggling a lot of variables at once and rarely get a chance to breathe. This is multiplied when you're dealing with bosses. Unlike other games where boss fights entail fighting a challenging enemy, the boss fights in Catherine challenge your on-the-fly decision-making by putting you on a strict time limit and throwing unique attacks to disrupt your progress. All you have to do is run away, and the boss is defeated if you can survive until you make it to the top of that section of the tower. Luckily, the game does give you the ability to go back in time and redo your previous block pushes a few times if you ended up screwing yourself over. Making progress up the tower is very addicting, especially when you get a flow going, and I guarantee you'll be solving block puzzles and hearing the game's sound effects in your head for hours after you turn the game off. It gets really difficult too, and aside from a few special items you can collect to help yourself out in a pinch, it's just you and a bunch of blocks for you to sort out. It's actually really interesting because the game teaches you new moves and techniques between levels, but it isn't like other games where you just press a button to activate new moves you learn. You actually have to remember these things and perform them when appropriate if the need arises. The game leaves you to your own devices when it comes to solving the tower's puzzles, but in other aspects of the game it can be very linear. Like I said, you do get multiple choice questions that affect the storyline progressively, but in terms of the overall story structure, you just get taken from scene to scene when the game feels like it. The bar is the only area outside of the nightmare that you get to walk around and talk to people in, and that's really enjoyable thanks to the great music and sense of atmosphere the place has, but I think the game would have benefited substantially from letting you explore this setting to a greater degree. Maybe if they let us hang around in Vincent's apartment before departing, or if we got a chance to leave the bar and explore a small area of the town and meet other characters. I don't know, obviously the focus of the game is on the block puzzles, but anything to make the game feel a bit less linear in terms of progression would have done wonders for it. I wanted to spend more time in this world and do more things in it because I really enjoyed what was there. At least what is there is kept visually interesting with how stylized it is. The game was sort of Atlus's test run of this 3D anime art style, which they're now using for Persona 5. Somehow it manages to look better than the CGI in most actual anime. All of the characters have very colorful designs and really expressive faces. The game actually has animated cutscenes in the same vein as something like Zone of the Enders 2, but I actually find the game's in-game cutscenes to be more visually appealing. This may have to do with the animated cutscenes having 2D characters but jarring 3D backgrounds, while the in-game cutscenes are just 3D everything, creating a more cohesive aesthetic. The levels themselves change theme and setting enough to keep things engaging too, even though you're just looking at a bunch of blocks the whole time. The game's style really captures the look of the art the characters are based on, which can sometimes be a disconnect for some games. You know, there are some games where a character's concept art doesn't translate well to a model, or the in-game version of a design just doesn't have the same sense of personality. This is extra impressive because this was all done on the same engine Fallout 3 runs on. What makes Catherine an interesting story is that it puts you in an uncommon situation as a main character in a relationship. This isn't about your character trying to get with one of many girls who fits your personal taste. It's about a guy struggling to make his current relationship work while temptation creeps in on him. And these aren't the archetypal women you'd normally see in a game like this. Vincent has to deal with ideas like commitment, marriage, and whether or not he wants to spend the rest of his life with the woman he's currently with, which is usually far over the horizon for games with these relationship elements. He doesn't want to be held down and have to change his lifestyle, and because of that, in his moment of vulnerability, the new Catherine seems like a brief moment of escape for him. He isn't a bad guy, he just has trouble dealing with the compounding stress in his life. He's easily influenced and makes small mistakes that come back to bite him constantly. I think the main appeal of Catherine is that it's a game that's very different from Atlus's normal high school-oriented role-playing games. Not saying this is the most mature and intelligent game they've made, or that their other games are dumb, but this one definitely feels like a game with more adult themes. And not just for having sex and gore as main elements of the story, it's how it deals with the mundanities of adult life and how things never wind up being as exciting as you thought they would be when you were younger that give it a worldview that'll resonate more with adults. And that makes for some really human characters that feel like they have life experience who fill the setting with intrigue. No two nights at the Sleepy Sheep are the same, and that makes it feel like a living, breathing setting. I'd love to see more of these characters in the future, maybe not in a sequel, but it'd be really cool to see some of them make a cameo in Persona 5 like Vincent did in Persona 3 Portable, or maybe we could visit the Sleepy Sheep similar to how we got to visit locations from Persona 3 and Persona 4. Because the game's story and gameplay are so different, there are going to be a lot of you who play the game and end up caring more about one aspect over the other. If you are that kind of person, you may find yourself slogging through one side of the game just to get to the other part you enjoyed. But I say both aspects of the game are totally worthwhile, and the non-traditional blending of these mechanics with this story is what makes it so different and memorable. I highly recommend this one. It's a small experimental puzzle game that manages to have a lot of charm alongside intense scenarios. I'd like to see Atlus make more games that diverge from their normal output in the future, especially if they can pull it off as well as they did here. Give it a try, and make sure you think things through, whether it be with your relationships or your progress up the tower, or else you'll find yourself sweating bullets just like Vincent. Thank you all for watching, and see you all next time.